Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to a, I suppose you can call this literally the last video of the year, type thing. I talked about how I was wanting to actually do one more video before the end of the year, and this is it. It's kind of I suppose you can call this like a downer video. But it's not to say that it's disappointing per se, but it's more or less of games that I just lost interest, I suppose you could say, is the word. And I'm going to explain my reasons for why I didn't like them, but I want to kind of like give them the, I guess, benefit of the doubt and say that they were actual genuinely good games, but there are some downsides to some of these. So this video is more or less going to be like talking about games that I just didn't like, but I'm sure there's somebody out there that probably would equally enjoy them better than what I could. So I guess that all depends. Two of them I will probably more than likely not be going back. One of them I want to try to go back later on, but we'll see how that turns out. So let's just go ahead and talk about 3 games that I just didn't like. And just for record, I'm gonna try to be unbiased, I suppose is the word, to where, you know, they generally had good ideals come in. They had good ideals. First up is Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition. So this game, I've actually been wanting to play for a long time, actually, ever since it first got announced years back for the GameCube. And then years later, it gets a remaster for both the Switch and the PS4. And, you know, I was still interested, and I was like, you know what, I want to try playing this eventually whenever I get a chance to. And eventually I did. And what did I think about it? Well, let's first start off by talking about its lore. I think that's the biggest thing that needs to be talked about its lore, so that you can get an idea of what is actually going on in this game. So, the lore of this game is that the world is covered in this deadly miasma, and so people have to rely on the power of the crystal in order to protect them. And every once in a while, the crystal will lose its power, and so one particular person of the village, or people, depending, I guess, they will travel outside the village into other dungeons in order to collect this drop in the chalice. And when the chalice is fully full, they will take it back to their tribe in order to rejuvenate the crystal. And that's basically the story. That is literally the story of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. Now, there is an alternate story, but you barely witness it at all. It seems more random, I want to say. And I want to say random because as you're just kind of like selecting dungeons and stuff like that, you will run across cutscenes that will just happen. Sometimes they're part of the main concept story, which technically sort of a background story, if you will, because it's kind of a half backwards type thing. It's like the main story should be the background story, and the background story is essentially what's supposed to be the main story I'm taking. And it's a weird mix. It's kind of like you're witnessing the main story of the game. That's the weird part. You know, it's like you're just an individual person traveling around trying to protect your tribe and stuff like that. Meanwhile, the main story is being constructed right before you. It's kind of a weird perspective, I'm not going to deny. It's an interesting one, but one that I didn't really care much for. But it's an interesting one nonetheless. Gameplay-wise, imagine Final Fantasy doing Diablo. That's kind of the basis of it. Although, I'm still kind of confused based on the ability and stuff like that. Like, you collect these spheres and stuff like that, these orbs, and they essentially do magical elements and stuff like that. But the weird thing is that every once in a while, they'll just up and disappear or reappear. And it does not make sense. I have not made any sense whatsoever. I'm sure if I looked it up online, there's like a reason of it and stuff like that. But the thing is, it's just like, you know, I'll have Thunder, Cure, and all that stuff. And for like multiple dungeons, I'll still have them. And then all of a sudden, I won't have them. And I'm like, wait, where is it? Is there a limit to them? Is there a limit? I thought there wasn't a limit. What? Why? What? So it's an interesting concept because as you're combining them, you layer the spell itself. Like combining thunder and thunder create thundera, and then one more thunder creates thunderga. That's basic knowledge. But then you get like 2 different spells and you'll get like gravity or something like that, which is, it's a pretty interesting concept. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like that, but I don't in the sense of like it's limitation. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden you'll be using the spell and then all of a sudden it'll disappear, and there was like no context as to like, oh, you can only use this once per dungeon. But it's like, oh, I have it again in another dungeon. So it's like I'm not fully understanding it, and it just, I have yet to have made sense of this thing. But despite this, there was actually one other element that really kind of got underneath my skin that I just ended up like saying, okay, think I'm done with this game. And that is the cycles. So essentially, every cycle you go through 4 dungeons of your choice, depending on how far of the map you're actually able to go through. And by going through these 4 random dungeons, you are able to rejuvenate the chalice, and then take it to the tribe and rejuvenate the crystal. So, you go through this 4 times, and then you start a new cycle, where you go through different dungeons in order to collect the droplets in order to rejuvenate the crystal, okay? Now, this does not sound like a bad thing, until you start to realize these cycles actually have like limiters. So every dungeon you go to can only be accessed, well, I mean, they can be accessed, but I mean, you won't get the droplet until like every 2 cycles. So every 2 cycles you can go back to the dungeon and revisit it. Is there a reason for it? Aside from getting like different bonus stats or something like that, there's really no real reason to go back to them, personally, I think. So it's sort of like a boring dungeon that you've previously went through with a boss that you can easily demolish in no time. But then you got another element where, depending on which cycle number you've went through and stuff like that, it will put you on hold. Literally, it will put you on hold. So in other words, there's this riverboat that you can ride that will take you to the other side of the continent and stuff. The problem is that if for some reason you enter in a cycle where the river is actually dried up, you can't cross to the other region. So it's sort of like, okay, so you're just repeating dungeons in the hopes of continuing a story. I don't like that. To me, I feel like this was a very limited, I suppose you could say this was a limitation, but only in the sense of like, I guess depending on if you are playing multiplayer or not. If you're playing with multiple people, I guess there's an appeal for this, but aside from that, I don't see this being a good game for a single player playthrough. I imagine for a single person, they would get bored of this game very easily, and I kind of ended up getting kind of bored. It was an actual interesting ideal concept, but one that I felt like, you know, based on the timing of things and stuff like that, it just didn't work very well. So in my personal opinion, this game is alright, but I felt kind of bored from it. So depending on who you are, if you're the type of person who has a bunch of friends that play either online or co-op, this game will potentially be good. But if you're playing it by yourself, then prepare to be a short-lived game. And I played this for like 8 hours before I was like, yeah, I'm done. So it's unfortunate that I lost interest in this one, but it was still pretty good nonetheless. Okay, so next up we have Fist, Forged in Shadowlight. So this was actually a game that I was pretty interested in whenever I first discovered the announcement. This was like a year ago, of course. I saw this and I was like, oh hey, this looks interesting. This looks like it'd be a really good game. And I was pretty interested, you know. It was anthropomorphic. It had a rabbit that had this mechanized arm. And you could use different tools and equipments and stuff like that to fight your way and stuff. And it looked really interesting. I liked it, the ideal. The actual game finally comes out and I'm playing it, and I'm kind of enjoying it. But then we have 2 big problems that I have with this game. The first problem is the technical aspects. So, technically, this game kind of suffers. So, I can't tell if it's because, you know, of the limitations or the fact that it was released on both PS4 and PS5. Maybe that could be it, but I don't know. It could be because of a number of factors, but the biggest thing is that every once in a while, the characters' fur textures. You've heard the term texture popping, right? That's kind of what this game kind of suffers through. Every once in a while, textures will kind of pop in and out, but every once in a while, the textures will just not happen at all, and every once in a while, you'll get a background that's completely blank. Like, it's a weird... It's so weird. It's like, I actually had this happen a couple times. I don't think I've had it happen while I was recording, but I had it happen a couple times, and I was like, what the flip happened here? It's like you go to the next room, and all of a sudden, it's just black. Like, your character is walking, but the background does not pop back in. And I don't know what it was. I'm not sure. I mean, the game's been out for quite some time, so I would imagine they would have patched this in by now. But it's like, okay, this is pretty bad. The fact that backgrounds don't pop in when they should and stuff like that, that's not good. That's definitely not a good thing. I mean, it's an indie game, I guess, but at the same time, I expected a little bit, I don't know, quality control is the word I'm looking for. But, I mean, there's plenty of indie games that are out there where the game is beautiful. And then there are some indie games that just, like, I don't know, they kind of fell through the sidelines. But that isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the platforming. Now, here's the thing, I'm not an expert when it comes to Metroidvania. Admittedly, I don't play that many Metroidvania games. I play a few, and if you've seen my channel in the past, you know I played like a handful of them and stuff, but I've never been like a hardcore Metroidvania fan. And one of the biggest things when it comes to Metroidvania is the platforming. Now, Fist actually has a bit of platforming, but it also has like an advanced tier platforming, and well, this is where I start to run into a problem. And that problem is that the platforming is a little bit too challenging for my take. I was actually having trouble with a little bit of few platforming aspects, and I couldn't get around stuff. It was pretty hard for my take. Even more so whenever you got enemies there. So that was whenever I decided to change the difficulty from the normal to easy. And at that point, it's like, why even have this game be what it is, you know? It doesn't have to be that complicated to maneuver and stuff, but they did. It kind of reminds me of the whole, like, I can't believe I'm saying this, and this is going to be an insult to the game, but it's kind of like the Mighty Number 9 segment, where you have this mechanic, you have this dash mechanic, which is literally the main mechanic of the game. But then all of a sudden, you just can't get used to that mechanic. You can't get used to the dash mechanic because there'll be some platforming segment that requires some real strategy to get through and stuff like that. And it's almost impossible to get through the game at that point. So it's like, I ended up actually getting almost kind of irritated with the game. And I was like, I don't like what this game's being, you know? I looked at the game and I saw intense combat. I did not see intense platforming. So, for me, sadly, I had to drop this as well. And it's kind of sad too. It's kind of sad. It has other problems, but my biggest problem was the platforming. I could not get used to it, sadly. And I know there are plenty of people who probably liked this game a lot better than I did. And I was looking so forward to playing this, but sadly, it did not go through for me, I'm afraid. Sorry if you liked this game. I'm sorry if I didn't like it. At least other people did, right? And now the final game to talk about is Hellpoint. Now, if you guys know what Hellpoint is, then that's great. You know, I don't have to explain myself. But for those that don't, allow me to basically tell it to you in a nutshell. It's a Dark Souls clone. If you've seen Dark Souls, or if you played Dark Souls, you know what it is. It's a game that is extremely hard. You get to equip armor and weapon and stuff like that, and your basic goal is to go through a gauntlet of enemies, get to a boss, beat the boss, and try to progress through the area and stuff. That's basically what this game is. Except it's a different concept, it's a different layer, it's futuristic, it's got, I want to say demonic entities. In a weird way, and I don't think people will agree with me, but it kind of reminds me of Doom if Doom and Dark Souls had a baby. That's kind of what this game is. This is literally Doom-esque Dark Souls, if you will. It's kind of weird, but it kind of works. It kind of works. It's got a lot of elements that I kind of like. For example, you have your basic weaponry, you got the light weapon, you got the heavy weapons, but then you also got, like, guns, and that's pretty cool to have. I'm not gonna lie, it was a pretty interesting element. But, okay, so here are something interesting. This game has, it kind of suffers the same way that, Fist did, where it was kind of like glitchy in some areas and stuff. And in some areas it was pretty obvious, like really obvious of kind of glitches and stuff like that. For example, texture popping, I've talked about that before. But then there's also another case where enemies will kind of accidentally go through walls. Sometimes they'll die and sometimes they won't die. And it's definitely kind of weird. The other aspect is that there's this platforming segment. Now, Dark Souls is not very big when it comes to platforming. In fact, platforming is usually equal to death, almost all the time. But in this game's case, it's got a little bit of platforming because you actually can jump in this game. You actually have a better jump mechanic than Dark Souls and Bloodborne combined together. It's almost secular grade of jumping, but not quite. It's a better jumping mechanic than Dark Souls and Bloodborne combined together. But you also have other platforming segments, and they're a little bit advanced here for a Souls-like game. So every once in a while, you'll just end up dying more times than you should. And this is what happened to me. I kept dying from platforming, but ultimately that wasn't the main case. There was actually another case in which where I kept getting lost. I rarely get lost in video games, but because of how Hellpoint was, I almost got myself lost almost all the time. Almost all the time. It's kind of sad and embarrassing, to say the least. Is that, you're playing through the game, you're doing fine, and all of a sudden you got circled around and you went, wait, what happened? What's going on? It also got a weird cycle time to it, where depending on the phasing of the eclipse and stuff, you also will have, like, restricted areas where you originally went through before, but then all of a sudden it becomes like a boss arena, but it's not really a boss arena, it's more of like a mob arena, a raid mob arena, where multiple enemies just show up, and they just, depending on how far you've gotten to the game or how used to it you are, you will get decimated real easily if you're not careful. A lot of enemies just pop up like insane. I've only been able to successfully get through something like this at least once. After that, I haven't been able to do that. But there was also a boss that I was trying to get through, and the boss designs I like. I like the boss designs. That's all the main reasons why I play these type of games. It's not the challenge, it's the designs of the bosses. I love the designs of the bosses. I love taking them on. I love challenging them and stuff. But there was this one boss, he's known as the Puppet Master. He kept jumping on me. I mean, I kid you not. He jumps and pounces on me, and it does a crap ton of damage. So much damage, and I wasn't for sure if this was even an area I was supposed to be in. And I kept looking walkthroughs and stuff like that, and I'm pretty sure that even these people are getting lost. Like, that's how bad it is. These people that are doing these walkthroughs are also getting themselves lost. So, I'm glad I'm not the only one who kept getting lost in this game, but also so did these people. These poor people who are trying to put together a professional walkthrough in some cases are all of a sudden getting themselves lost, and it's like, wait, where am I at now? What am I doing? Wait, this isn't part of the guide that I wrote. Where am I at? That's not good. It's just, every Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls-esque game that I go through and stuff like that has not been that bad. I've never gotten to a point to where I was lost. I was just like, yeah, this is no problem. I got through this just fine. And the enemies, you know, when you go through one Dark Souls game and you're familiar with the Dark Souls formula, is not that bad. But this game, holy crap, does it know when to just throw in enemies that will just straight up just like be the biggest douche. You know, you got enemies that will throw projectiles, you got enemies that tend to group up, you got enemies that will just crawl out of nowhere. There's a lot of crawl space for enemies to go through and stuff, and so it tends to be sneaky at times. It's a great element of a game, I'm not gonna lie. I love the element that this game delivers, but it's got a lot of problems. A lot of problems that I feel like the developers wasn't clear on fixing, and a lot of problems that I feel like it comes with understanding the game. And I actually got irritated to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take a break from this and move on to something else, because this is an interesting game, but I don't want to completely hate it. I don't want to completely disown it or whatever, but it's kind of hard to continue playing a game that you kind of lose interest, sadly. That's how Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and all this stuff, that's how most people end up giving up on those games, because they have a hard time getting through it. They have a hard time of understanding and stuff. Whereas, you know, if you've beaten Dark Souls and you know how the Dark Souls formula work, you know how to get through stuff like this. This game tends to take itself to level 15. And at that point you just go, wait, what are we doing? So, it's kind of this confusing element, and it's almost impossible to figure it out. I do plan on going back into this game and trying to, like, you know, learn it. But that's going to be a long time because, you know, Elden Ring will be coming out soon, and there are plenty of other games that I'm looking forward to playing rather than this. So it might be a year or two before I jump into this. Who knows? But at the same time, for those that are interested in Hellpoint, word of warning, this might be that one Souls clone game that you might want to try to, like, you know, be cautious of. So don't get cocky. You will have problems with it, just like how I did. So anyway, those are 3 games that I have played that I unfortunately feel a little indifferent on. I know some people will have mixed opinions about what I have to say. I'm not saying these games are absolutely bad, I'm just saying for some people will like them and some people will just lose interest in them. So if you're that type if you're that type of person who has a particular level of just like, is this game going to be good for me? You might want to be wary of, because I have my patience, but even I kind of lost interest in some of these games. So I guess it just happens, you know? Sometimes you'll play a game and you stick with it for a while and you start to love it, but then you'll play a game or two and then all of a sudden you just go, this isn't fun anymore. So yeah, anyway, guys, thank you so much. Hope you guys are having a wonderful year, and hopefully I will see you next year with some potential videos, perhaps, maybe. Who knows? We'll see how that goes. So thank you so much. See you in the next one. Happy New Year, guys.